So Darby, the laptop worked?
Yeah, I just had to get a different laptop. Just wouldn't take my ASU laptop.
Was it a Chromebook?
Something must be blocking it. I don't know.
Was it a Chromebook? What were you using?
No, it's just a Dell. ASU just has really hardcore security features. It's something weird.
What our tech guy here said is, and Gretchen originally had some issues, and he said, use your incognito Google page, and it went right to it.
Yeah, mine didn't do it even when I did that. It still told me I didn't have the ability to log in as the host.
Well, ASU,
But
for as much as
at
they're doing
least-
online, you'd think they'd figure that out, right?
At least I'm able to get in. I mean, we have
Yeah.
more laptops than any one house needs, so.
Well, I go to these sessions to check to make sure everybody's here. So I'm, I just make sure everybody's not having trouble. And Heather, I see that you're here. Ready?
Yep.
And
We're all
have I seen you yet? Or there? Oh, there's Janine. So Janine, you're in charge. If your group doesn't come, you'll have to do it, right?
Ashley's having a little bit of trouble, but
does she need the link?
The link wasn't working for her. She said she's trying. I'm texting with her right now.
Just cut and paste the links. I'll send them to her as well. Tell her that I'm sending her.
I think she's in. I think I just admitted her.
I'm
Yeah.
here.
Thank
I'm
you.
here.
Oh. How many professors does it take to log into a Zoom session after a year, right?
Wow. Hi, everybody.
I might be back, but I'm going to go check other sessions to make sure we're rocking and rolling. Thank you.
Can somebody say something so I can see if my AirPods are working?
Hey, buddy. Hey, Keith.
Technology.
You're talking. I'm
Yeah,
talking.
I got
All right, so we still have people coming in. We've got about 4 minutes before the session actually starts, but I just wanted to introduce myself really quickly. My name is Laura. I'm going to be the session chair today. So if you guys, presenters, if you guys need anything, let me know. I believe it's 15 to 20 minutes per presentation. So I'm going to give you a 5-minute warning, kind of let you guys know, hey, you've got 5 minutes. And then I, of course, will wrap you up. Hi. I see you all the time on Facebook, and I'm so excited I get to see you face to face. So anyway, I'm so excited for you guys. This sounds like a great panel. So I'm going to give about 3 more minutes, and then we'll get started. That way, we can respect everybody's time. And I'm excited. Hope you guys have been enjoying your summit so far.
Can you hear us now, Keith?
No, I'm just gonna hope that my neighbor doesn't start mowing their lawn. Is that for a first world problem? Ooh, I think I got it.
All right, can you hear me?
It's all right. We're good.
All right. So it looks like we're about to roll over to 3:30. So I want to welcome everybody to session 3A for young adult literature. Like I said, my name is Laura Davis. I'm a grad student at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. So I'm very excited for you to be our presentation. Well, this presentation, we've got some great presenters on cue for you today. Just a few reminders, please make sure your mic is off while the presentations are going on. That way you are giving your presenters your utmost respect. They've done a lot of hard work and this is their time to shine. All right. Also, there will be an evaluation at the end of the summit for you guys to fill out, to kind of share your experiences throughout the summit this year, as well as if you like the Zoom format or would rather prefer face-to-face. So keep an eye out for that. Please make sure you fill it out. Because the summit committee is really interested to see what you guys think. All right, for the sake of time today, each presentation is going to be about 15 to 20 minutes. Make sure you hold your questions until the end. I will be monitoring the chat. So if there are questions you're just like dying for you to know, I'll keep those in the side chat. I'll give a 5-minute warning to a presenter so that they know that they've got 5 minutes, and then I, at the bell, will of course wrap up, and that gives us about 10 minutes at the end for questions. So I'm actually going to let the presenters introduce themselves. That way that they kind of know, what they want to share and what they don't want to share. Our first presentation is from Avoiding to Embracing, Exploring Teachers' Responses to Mental Health in a Royal Book Club.
Hey.
I'm gonna let you guys get started.
Thank you. Susan, can you pull up our slides? So thank you all for being here. We'll get this pulled up. All right, so I am Janine Darragh. I work with teacher preparation at University of Idaho, and I am excited to introduce my colleagues, Dr. Ashley Boyd, who also does teacher preparation at Washington State University, and Susan Rose, who is a literacy coach and high school English teacher at Quincy High School, and also is a doctoral student at University of Idaho. So today, slide please. Today we're going to just do an overview of a research study we started last summer. We are hoping there'll be a little bit of time for you all to discuss with one another, either via the chat or our Jamboard. We'll share a couple of implications for practice, and then of course there's time for questions at the end. We have put the slides in the chat so you can access those if that's easier for you. So this particular study was to investigate rural teachers' perspectives on social justice topics and young adult literature. And we were particularly interested in how and why teachers might choose to teach or to not teach certain sensitive social justice topics and certain texts. Slide, please. So this is part of a larger qualitative study examining rural teacher discourse communities. And so we were super lucky. Ashley was awarded a grant that allowed us to develop this book club It was specifically for rural teachers in the inland Northwest. And so we set out invitations through social media. We also sent letters to all of the superintendents of schools in Idaho that fit the Census Bureau's definition of rural. And we were super excited that 19 teachers actually decided to participate, and they weren't all English teachers, which was even more exciting to us. We had a science teacher, social studies teacher, school counselor. So we decided to break the book club into 2 separate book clubs so we could hear more voices. And we split those by teaching experience, teachers who had more than 5 years teaching experience and those who had 5 or less. It also just worked out that this sort of separated them by teaching level. Our novice teachers all taught middle level, or mostly taught middle level. And again, these are very, very rural contexts. So most of our teachers taught multiple levels. Often they are the only English teacher in the district, teaching grades 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. So we gave them a survey regarding what social justice topics are most relevant to their students. Poverty, mental health, Indigenous rights, domestic violence, and sexuality emerged as the topics that they were most interested in. We met 4 times via Zoom, each time with a different book. We recorded and transcribed each session. We did follow-up interviews after the book clubs were over with half of the participants. And then we did qualitative thematic coding and critical discourse analysis to analyze our data. The book that we are focusing on for this presentation was our second meeting. The book was Darragh the Great is Not Okay. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. We chose it because 1, it's awesome. And 2, Ashley and I both had success with pre-service teachers in our young adult lit courses and secondary English methods courses with this book. And then it incorporates so many topics that this group of teachers identified as important to their students. Darragh is a self-described fractured Persian. He's Iranian American, questioning his sexuality and living with and managing depression.
Okay, thanks, Janine. So I'll hop in and tell you a little bit about what we found when we started to analyze the conversations amongst the teachers. It was quite interesting, actually, because our veteran teacher group and our novice teacher group had different reactions and different kinds of conversations. So we're just going to tell you about 2 of those, sort of the key points that we found in both of those and the shifts that we found. And so initially, the veteran teacher group started out with this very strong statement, one participant saying, there's no way I'm teaching this book, right? There's too much in it, too many concerns. And mainly because, thanks, Susan, the teacher expressed that at their school the previous year they had a student who died from suicide, and so she was worried about tackling and talking about mental health. And we understand and want to validate that concern, and so we kind of let the group talk themselves about it. And Janine and I tried really hard to stay quiet, which those of you who are teachers know that's really difficult. And let them kind of work through that. And then they did. So we saw, again, in both groups, a shift, really interesting shift in when we did the discourse analysis of how they start to talk maybe differently and support one another and thinking about and thinking through the topic. So Nora starts out with this, I can't teach this, I'm worried about mental health. And as the conversation continued, we had one participant, Kristen, who said, okay, but I think that that's actually exactly the reason that we need to teach this. They actually worked in the same school. And so Kristen said, one of my focuses for next year is to concentrate on mental health because of what has happened at our school and because our students are so concerned about this. And I think this book can help me do that. So as the conversation continued, then they began to sort of throw out ideas, and Susan will talk about that in just a few minutes, of, okay, so maybe let's shift our thinking about how we might be able to actually embrace this text rather than just avoiding it because we don't want to talk about it and we don't want students to continue down that path. So that was the veteran teacher group. For them, it was the mental health topic. In the novice teacher group, the conversation started out completely differently. They talked in the beginning about how much they love the book, whereas the veteran teachers at first said they did not like it. So Janine and I were like, kind of, this is really an interesting juxtaposition here between the two groups, and they were within 2 hours of each other. But the novice teacher group had a different concern, and that was about depictions of sexuality. One in terms of anatomy, and because there's a couple of mentions of the word penis in the book. There's one scene where the Darragh is not circumcised, and he gets kind of picked on from his friends in the book for that. And so some of the teachers said, there's no way I could do this in my middle school. My students wouldn't be able to handle this. And then there was also a concern because Darragh is questioning his sexuality in the book, about if parents would be concerned about the presentation of that. And so these teachers expressed that fear and maybe and desire to avoid the book. But again, as the conversation continued, significant others in the group kind of pushed and challenged that. So here we can see Zoe saying, well, hey, I think if you front loaded it and said, this is what's going to happen in the book, this is why I'm using it. And then she talked about using common sense media to justify her choice. She said, that's kind of what I always go to if I have to explain things. There's this resource that we can use to back up our choices. And kind of shifted the group's thinking again into maybe we could do this, right? Let's think differently about this. And so, this one again transpired in a similar path from like, no, I can't do this to maybe I'll think more about it. But each one focused on a different topic.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Janine. So one of the things that was notable from participants in the study is that they started to identify kind of subversive strategies for teaching social justice texts. And so like has been mentioned, people start off with this very strong visceral reaction and a very legitimate reaction for practicing teachers of any of those topics, whether it be sexuality or an issue with mental health. Like there's lots of reasons that teachers would have a little trepidation with that, but they begin through critical colleagueship to start to kind of find ways to talk themselves, kind of into it and provide themselves support. Like Janine mentioned, rural teachers are often the only person, in their district. They might be teaching 6 to 12
until 3:30. John forbid those 2 hours. Oh my God.
Oh, for secondary. So there's, lots of reasons that they, maybe don't have ideas to bounce each other off of, and they don't have those safe learning communities to talk to each other. So in this book club, they get together and they start to say, well, maybe we could do literature circles. And they're like, oh yeah. And so for those of you that haven't done a lot of literature circles, it's like, well, the students could choose their book for the literature circle, and then they would know what the content was and they would know what they were signing up for. They would also have the safety of talking about a book within a group of students that they felt comfortable with. I know in my own classroom, kids choose their groups, and they're also given, some different choices of books to read when we read social justice books that are, have topics that could be a little bit more challenging depending on your reading and experience level. So they noticed that literature circles would be good. They also, like I just said, talked about student choice, having it, available for students either within a choice of a, literature circle or having it within libraries or a recommendation, but that kids that, needed or were interested in some of these topics or support from some of these topics could still, read that text if they were able to choose it on their own. They also recognize that maybe they couldn't do the full book, right? Or maybe they didn't even have time to do the full book, but text excerpts, which are really common in curriculum to show students of lots of large variety of literature, that they could show the parts of the book that they felt like everybody had an entree point into. And then so everyone got a little bit of the learning. And then if a student was like, I really love this, then directing them to read the book on their own. Which leads me into independent and private reading. One participant mentioned that, she has them read things, not out loud in class or in part of the summer, so that kids aren't having to worry, especially some of those middle grade teachers really worried about, that performative, they see the word penis or something and everyone has to react and, kind of make it a big deal. She provided some evidence from another book that she had shared with students where they were able to, kind of have a private moment with digesting some of the content, and they didn't have to feel that social pressure from their peers. So they identified some of those subversive strategies. So what we really noticed theoretically was the critical colleagueship and shifting perspectives. So critical colleagueship really was, that initial, it's just easy to reject a text that, could potentially be challenging or have pushbacks, especially in conservative rural communities. And then you start seeing with, I believe it was Norma in the earlier slide, where she was like, no, there was this incident that happened where we lost a student. And I know that our inclination is to be concerned about copycats. And I know that our inclination is to shut this away, but I feel like we should maybe be looking at this in this different way of through education and through support. And I've been thinking a lot about this. And I think that this book could really help that. So it's like that person in the group that kind of pivots those decisions, right, of the group. And then that's where you start seeing in both groups, people start saying, okay, well, maybe this really is important. And maybe here's some ways that we could even take baby steps like independent reading or text excerpts to walk ourselves into these really challenging topics. Critical colleagueship is really important because it, has folks in communities challenging each other, right? A little bit saying like, no, I think that this is worth it. But because they are within, right, a learning community of teachers, where they're co-constructing this meaning and reconstructing this meaning, they could provide some support for people. And then the discourse community as a professional development opportunity, it's not just going to that big fancy training in the summer. It's this constant thing in a PLC community where you see people, helping and, building meaning and adding like, I think this strategy, or I think this way, or I think this text, or could be important and helpful to our students, best version of their learning. And then especially within the realms of sensitive texts and collaboration. Okay. So we want to get to the interactive part of this. So we created a Jamboard and we have 3 questions. And I think just because of time, I'll have you focus on the first one, and I'll give you guys about, I don't know, like 3 minutes to try to fill out, the first one. And then if you get done with the first one, then start adding to the second one and the third one. You can just click right here into the slide deck I shared, but I'm sure some folks maybe came in late. Janine, can you copy and paste and repost the link in the chat for those people?
I got it.
Okay, perfect. Or the link to this. And so just start with this one because I know we're limited on time, but we kind of want to replicate a little bit of a little PLC here with you guys today. Let's think about those there's no way in teaching that text that either kind of you've encountered or that you know of as being one that people just have like immediate reservations, and really being thoughtful about why it was challenging. If you get done with that one, then you can start adding to the second one. Like, what are some ways, like what are some strategies that you guys have identified beyond, you can say literature circles if that's it, but other things. Oh, cool. So we can kind of begin to build a resource for all of us that are coming to this training today, and then talking about how important collaboration is for you. So yeah, just start there, and you can just go into the little sticky note, post on it, type your message, and then push save, and it'll do it. Any questions on how to do that?
You guys have about 4 minutes left in your presentation.
Okay. And there's a Q&A after that, is that correct?
Yes, so there'll be 10 minutes about at the end.
Okay, so we'll just give you guys the last 4 minutes to kind of fill this up as much as you can. And then we'll use that time to kind of share it out as discussion or answer questions. Does that sound good to everybody?
Sorry, that was a mistake. I don't know how to fix that.
Can you do butterfly Z?
It just removed me from the site. I'm so sorry. It's not more important than anybody else's stuff. Oh, yay.
So I'm going to let you guys continue adding to that. And we'll share out here at the 3 or 4 minute mark that I'm on right now. But the one thing that I really liked as a practitioner is to have some of these take action moments that were presented in this article. So when we're thinking about mental health or social justice, building your repertoire of texts that address mental health in positive ways or social justice, topics in positive ways, especially those written for young adults, or one way that you can take action. Variety is the key right there, right? To examine how texts that you already teach include representations of mental health or social justice topics that you feel like need to be centered, and then plan for how you can incorporate those discussions into your curriculum. A lot of stuff from the canon can be kind of, looked at in a different way so that you can start talking about those issues that are a little challenging, and they already, are approved usually by curriculums and school boards. Number 3, seek opportunities for professional development like you're doing today to expand your knowledge of leading conversations on potentially sensitive topics. There are techniques and ways to do it. And then consult district policies on what to do if a student discloses concerns about their own mental health. That's specifically for mental health. And then number 4, talk with your school counselor about resources available for students related to mental health, or if you have a topic that you feel like is sensitive. And invite guest speakers from the school and local organizations to share information with your students in order to normalize discussions of mental health. Oops. And we have a full list of references at the end that you can feel free to look through if you're curious about where any of this thinking kind of came from.
All right, thank you so much, guys. That was such a fascinating presentation. I really do appreciate what you had to share. Darius is Not Okay is such a fantastic book, and it does definitely have a lot of teachable, it belongs in all the places. So well done, guys. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to the second presentation, which is From Inside to Outside, a critical content analysis of multi-voiced YA novels.
All right, thank you. I am Dr. Heather Weymouth. I come from Westchester University in Pennsylvania, and I'm here today with Keith Newvine and Dr. Sarah Fleming, who are both current high school ELA teachers. And so what we're really looking at today is the multi-voiced young adult novels and ways that they may align with Rudine Sims Bishop idea of sliding glass doors. So I'm going to give you just a moment to read this quote here. This is the original quote from Rudine Sims Bishop's 1990 piece, Windows, Mirrors, and Sliding Glass Doors. So I'll take a few seconds and then Keith will pick it up from here.
Most everybody, we would hope, knows of this. It's a groundbreaking article that Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop came up with in 1990. Our particular study here focuses on multi-voice novels, specifically ones that contain multiple narrators or alternate between stories. And the key for us is that they decenter the importance of singular character identities, presumptions, and realities. And so we're co-constructing knowledge with the reader and with the narrator and with the author. We gave a couple of examples. We Are Not From Here by Emily Sanchez. No, that's not right. And then Children of Blood and Bone, another text that has alternating texts or narrators. We have a video here we're not going to show, but it's in our presentation, which we put in the chat. This is from Jenny Torres Sanchez, the author of We Are Not From Here, and she talks about her book. We also put Tomi Adeyemi's talk with Jimmy Fallon from the Tonight Show on here. So be sure to check those out if you haven't seen those. Rich information from both authors, certainly. So we're going to come back to Dr. Bishop's, Rudine Sims Bishop's original article, and we're going to focus on sliding glass doors specifically. And so this is the only quote from which Dr. Bishop mentions sliding glass doors. She spent a bit more time talking about the other two metaphors. But there are some, and we want to make sure we say Redeemson's bishop is a queen. We're not certainly taking apart this theory, but we do want to be critical consumers of text as we teach our students. There are a couple of phrases in here that we encourage you to take a look at, especially only have to, which makes it seem like a simplistic reading as a simplistic journey. And we want to complicate that a bit with our youth. We also want to talk about or encourage you to consider what it means to walk through an imagination, which doesn't really have a lot of personal action involved. And so we want to move sliding glass doors to the center of this framework that often gets under theorized. In 2017, Johnson et al. Pick up this part of the metaphor in their article, and they say that windows and sliding glass doors, or we say rather, that windows and sliding glass doors as aspects of literature are inspiring and thoughtful, but there's a haunting othering that, to them, of voyeurism or a potential colonization that worries even the most careful reader. So looking into strange places or becoming a part of another person's world is enticing, certainly, but dangerous. Done carefully with empathy and compassion and love, and positioned as nurturing knowledge and appreciating the experience of those involved in the narrative, this type of reading can be very powerful for the readers. Done incorrectly and positioned as colonial or depreciating, this type of reading experience can lead to a bigger walls and stronger animosity. And such a reading experience recenters whiteness rather than the experience of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and potentially reifies that problematic voyeuristic position. They also pick up in that article from 2017, Johnson et al., to sort of make a lineage here. They do it sort of backwards. They cite Louise Rosenblatt, and then they move to Freire. They say that the work of Freire is particularly relevant to the third component of Bishop's metaphor, because he wrote that reflection and action upon the world in order to transform it is part of the reading experience. And he noted that people think critically about the world, they're posed to intervene actively in reality and carry out along in the wake of the change. Louise Rosenblatt, whose focus on the transaction between the reader and the text, has the potential to inform the shape the conversation as well. Rosenblatt reminded us that purpose guides how and why we read, and response is determined not only by intellectual insight, but also by readers' emotional investment. Later on in her 2012 article from the Journal of Children's Literature, Rudine Sims Bishop wrote, "I also recognize that a window could be a barrier, allowing children to look in but not be part of the observed experience, hence the sliding glass door of the title, a way to suggest that a book can offer what Rosenblatt called a lived experience for the reader." Then we focus on Debbie Reese in her article from, I think it was English Journal, where she talks about curtains. And I want to give everyone a second to read that and consider a curtain as a way, as a barrier, but as a protective barrier for sources of knowledge in private spaces, especially considering problematic tropes in history and in literature. Debbie Reese compels us to consider how stories are shared and what knowledge belongs to what communities. And so we come at this from this particular perspective, which is key for us. I had my students sort of make sense of this for me, the similarities between a curtain and a sliding glass door. They told me that both were barriers that were intended to be moved. And so we consider a curtain and a sliding glass door as a potentially under-theorized part of the metaphor that requires a movement or a removement of a barrier of some sort in order to build a community. And that removement of that barrier can lead to love and empathy and compassion and action. And so that's where we are in our theoretical framework in order to talk about texts and the pedagogy thereof as sliding glass doors or curtains.
So our real research question within this study is how can multi-voiced YA narratives become these type of sliding glass doors that we can engage in that movement and re-movement? Our methods are really centered on the hashtag Project Lit book lists. If you're unfamiliar, these are grassroots book lists of representative texts for YA audiences. And we found within the 2016 to 2020 lists that there were 20 of these multi-voice novels, and we engaged in a critical content analysis as outlined by Johnson, Mathis, and Short. You can see our coding categories that are up there for you right now. These are what got us started and got us to some findings of some very initial themes within the works. What we noticed as we looked across all 20 novels was that there's a large diversity in the authors' identities. However, all of them are adults. And there's also a large diversity in the narrator identities. However, all of them are youth. So there's a little bit of an interesting distance at play there. The plot themes across the 20 novels are all centered somehow on breaking down and building or rebuilding community. And the multi-voice structure of these novels allowed for a critical exploration of multiple characters and their various forms of capital and the capital that exists within each of their communities. We've talked about these pieces elsewhere, and when we actually get this one to print, this will be there too. What we really want to talk about today is what we found that focuses on that sliding glass door. We've all had this experience where you don't open the glass door and you run into it time and time again. And so our major finding is kind of the most obvious one, is that teachers are the ones that open the doors. And teachers are the ones that have to kind of figure out what is the barrier and find ways of moving or removing that barrier so that their students don't suffer this man's fate and can walk right through and really get the benefit of a sliding glass door. We have purported 3 questions that are really useful in thinking about how to do this type of work as a teacher. They are, does the curriculum encourage a deep exploration of multiple perspectives? Does the text itself remove a barrier in order to build community? And does the teacher's pedagogy foster students' critical engagement and love for humanity? So we don't think that we need to walk through each of these questions individually like some sort of lockstep checklist. Instead, we consider them holistically, and we're going to give you a couple sets of paired novels and then a model unit at the end. As we get into the next set of slides, you're going to see that there's a lot of links here. I'm not going to talk about what's in each of those links, but there's lots more for you to explore later on, especially if these are books that are near and dear to your heart or possibilities for your own curriculum. So within these 3 questions, it kind of prompts us to ask some other questions. And one of those is, who gets to tell the story? So A Long Walk to Water is written by Linda Sue Park about a man, Salva Dutt, who is a real person, and Naya, who is a fictional character. And Park drew upon Dutt's journals, interviews with him, and her visits to his Water for South Sudan project site. And when we look at this book, I've seen it taught in a variety of classrooms at this point, sometimes really well, sometimes in ways that could be a sliding glass door, and sometimes in ways that shut down the conversation for certain students. Some of the barriers that exist are the fact that it does blur the lines between fiction and nonfiction. This starts to create a distance between the reader and Salva Dutt, who is an actual person who actually lived through this story and this journey. Further contributing to that distance is the fact that this story is told in the 3rd person, so it's really told about Dutt, and it is a retelling from Linda Sue Park's voice. Also, as much of the story, almost all the story, exists within South Sudan, it's a very distant setting for many of our YA readers. So there's all these different layers of distance that a teacher might have to navigate as a barrier in order to help students really get all that they could out of the experience in this book. One way to do that is to incorporate lots of different types of nonfiction texts. One of the things that comes up for me, I'm just like Keith was saying about Rudine Sims Bishop, I love Linda Sue Park. I love this book. But one of the remaining questions for me is why Selva is not a co-author of the book when it really does represent his own story. So another story, another narrative that can help us think about who gets to tell the story from a different angle is the book All American Boys. And All American Boys is co-authored by two authors. So Jason Reynolds and Brendan Kiley each wrote from a separate perspective, their own perspectives that are more closely aligned with each of the two narrators within the text. And it is about a act of police brutality towards a young Black man, and there is a young white man who witnesses this. And so the potential barriers that exist here, we don't have that same barrier of who gets to tell the story because the author's identity and the character's identity is much more closely aligned. But we do still have adults penning teen stories rather than opportunities where teens get to share those stories in their own voices in that very immediate sense. It is a fictional setting, so it does create a little bit of distance. And as the previous group was talking about, this is a hot button topic that some teachers might say, I'm not teaching that. So ways to think about removing these barriers are to really think about how to make it local and how to build upon activity happening within the area that you specifically teach, drawing upon actual teen voices, drawing upon the movements and the activists and the efforts that are really near and dear to your students and your context. So after we talk about who gets to tell the story, then we decided we needed to look outwards just a bit more and think about what the community has to say, who is represented within that text. So Wonder, another text that a lot of people love. I'm going to start going faster so we can actually get all the way through in our 5 minutes. But this is a story that has drawn a lot of critique from within the disability community for being an instance of what's called inspiration porn. If you're not familiar with that, definitely check out that link from Stella Young. And also some issues around representation of disability, both in literature and in film. So in this case, one of the best ways we can deal with this barrier is to walk away. When the community being represented really has a visceral reaction to a story, perhaps that's not a story we should be teaching. And so within our set of 20 books, we couldn't find another one that represented the disability community, but Good Kings, Bad Kings is a multi-voice novel written by a disabled author about disabled characters. It is written for adults, but it has really broadened what we can think of as representations of disability in literature. And yet still there are some barriers that we can work around. And so we want to think about themes of agency and interdependence rather than simply independence. And we need to actually think about whether this is a book that is welcome within our K-12 classrooms or not. I see the comments going on down below. The last line that I didn't get to in Wonder is actually the same point that you are making. So what does this actually look like when we put it in a unit?
So really quickly, we want to recommend using a novel like Elizabeth Acevedo's Clap When You Land. And if you don't know this, I believe this is the one that just won the Walden, am I correct? The Walden Award. This is a beautiful novel, and it is told from the two alternating perspectives of sisters, Camino Rios and Yahira Rios. But the thing is they don't know that they're sisters until a little bit of the ways into the story. The premise of the book is that the two of them find out that their father has actually two families living in two different places, one in Dominican Republic and the other family in New York City. So both of these girls find out that there is another family when they lose their father. The book opens up and their father has died in a plane crash. And so immediately the book introduces a lot of themes of grief and love. And then the story works forward as the two young women come to know who each other are, and then have to get to know one another as they try to grieve their father's death. So the reason why we mentioned this book as one of our choices is looking at how this book can act as the book can act as the sliding glass door, and as teachers can be the ones that open that. Both of these perspectives are told in first person, alternate between the two girls telling their stories. And then when Acevedo, by doing so, she's not only opening this door, nor are we as teachers doing that, but by having reading in this first person perspective, students are invited into this narrative with them. So to remind you of what we were talking about earlier, Keith mentioning the idea of what can be dangerous possibly with and possibly voyeuristic in terms of how to observe another culture or another person's lived experience. So we go back to these questions that Heather mentioned earlier. How does a book transform a text from a window to a sliding glass door? Does the curriculum encourage a deep exploration of multiple perspectives? Does it remove a barrier in order to build community? And probably, I think, very importantly, is does a teacher's pedagogy foster students' critical engagement and love for humanity? So we envision using this book not only as just the reading of the text itself, but as the beginning of an invitation to students to engage in the same kind of personal place-based storytelling, where they engage in a critical community inquiry project. The very beginning of the book opens with a poem that might be referred to as "I Know Too Much of Mud," and it's this gorgeous explanation of Camino's understanding of her identity as related to her space and her place where she grows up in Dominican Republic. And we can do that same type of work, not just invite students to observe through the glass door, but to walk through it and cross that threshold by centering their stories too and their lived experiences. And we can grow that text set to be something that they can work on. I'm sorry, I'm rushing because I know we're out of time. But this work, if you're not familiar with Goldie Muhammad's equity framework, or if you have not yet read Cultivating Genius, that is where this work that has to do with criticality is informing our work for doing this particular kind of unit. So no, go ahead. You can go. We're going to leave time for questions. So go ahead. Heather, did you want to go back over these questions, or is that Keith?
No, these are just our questions again for more exploration. And then, oh, I skipped a slide. Maybe I got rid of it. Those are our questions and to consideration, and that's us. Thank you very much for coming to our show.
Thank you.
Well done, guys. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm going to open it up for questions. We have about 8 minutes. So if you want to drop your question either in the chat or unmute yourself and ask your question, go for it.
I have a question for Ashley, Janine, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the third person. I'm on my phone. I was wondering, in terms of thinking about context and across these two presentations and conversations, I'm wondering if y'all thought about how a rural book about mental health or a rural book about a particularly maybe tricky topic for teachers would land a little differently. I haven't, unfortunately, I'm sort of slow on the uptake and I haven't read Darius, the Great Is Not Okay yet, but I was curious about that setting and whether or not you have thought about using a rural text, and maybe that might land a little differently for teachers.
I'll take this one. Absolutely. We started the book study with the book, The Serpent King, Jeffrey Zentner's book, which takes place in rural Tennessee and addresses all kinds of issues, including some mental health issues as well. And it was hands down the favorite of all of the teachers. We started with it for a reason. We thought they would really connect with it. One of the teachers ended up Ashley and I have done a follow-up study with her. She bought we were able to buy her a whole class set. She used it with her students. so we, with Darius, we noticed they didn't connect personally, but then they were able to talk quite a bit about how important it is to share different cultures with their students. So now we go back to that, our second presentation, we've seen ourselves in the literature represented. Now let's look at other worlds and lived experiences. Ashley, do you have, or Susan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's great. And I'm wondering now if there was any dissent in the Serpent King conversation. So we really have done this like close to source analysis of Darius, but we haven't as much looked at the Serpent King yet, but it does seem like they were much more on the same page in that one. So yeah.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat from Michelle about what else we've been thinking in terms of moving sliding glass doors so that students can step through and in. And it kind of, my thought, and then Sarah and Heather, please jump in. But even the first question, right? I feel like geographies often become barriers, just urban, rural, right? And there are also so many other connotations that come with that. And so one of the things that I really try to do, I teach in a suburban school, which is a little rural and a little suburban. I try to get them to recognize that 10 minutes down the road is a different geography, right? And a different way of being. And so Sarah and I, especially who work in neighboring school districts, really try to break down those barriers so that they almost don't exist, right? Schools are so segregated in so many ways that we try to make those barriers non-existent. And so having conversations with students about institutions that create barriers, including geographies and economies, is part of the way of doing that by presenting factual knowledge about ways that barriers exist hypothetically. Like, you know, school district borders are imaginary. So too are national borders. Those are imaginary. And so we need to talk about that.
And like Keith said earlier, there's a real danger to reading books where culturally they may be placed someplace else geographically. It'd be very easy to sort of tokenize Clap When You Land and have the book become the central part of a unit that's a study of Dominican Republic and is not really going to be about sort of the language and the beauty of the poetry within the book, or it's the idea of identity and place as related to that. But by asking students to both read and try to empathize with multiple characters in that first person perspective, and then also to consider their own storytelling as a way to engage with their own sense of identity and their place currently, then they're working in multiple directions. And that in itself might be another way to cross that threshold.
Yeah. And in a real practical sense, while we're saying that teachers are the ones to open the door, almost all of those links that we have for you there are other texts to use. And so really it's a wide reading across a number of experiences and multiple views on a similar experience that really is what helps students walk in and through a door. But within K-12 classrooms, often to get access to all of those texts, it's on the teacher in order to put those materials and that type of experience together.
All right, any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. We have about 2 minutes left.
I just wanted to say, because these people are smarter than I am, but Tamara Butler and Valerie Kinlock both talk about geographies of literacies and literacy of place. So to learn more about that, I encourage you to read their research.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, thank you so much to the presenters. You guys did fantastic. It made me miss the classroom. So well done. I give you all the props. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of your summit. And good luck. Have a lovely rest of your Thursday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
And if you are planning to stay in this room, I am going to close it and reopen it because that'll split up the recording. So it'll be more convenient for later.